see if we can get this thing going this morning. There is no way that can be right. I am doing an experiment. Full disclosure here, I am by no means an expert on drying lumber. In fact, I probably know extremely little. I know a lot about cutting it, fashioning it, forming it, nailing it. I know a little bit about its structural integrity and what size of lumber to use where. And so while I'm in the full disclosure mode here, let me just add, just because a person is, let's say, mature or a little bit longer in the tooth doesn't mean that they know a whole lot about anything. Probably they've learned a few things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an expert just because they're older. However, one thing that is pretty consistent across the board, at least for a lot of folk anyway, is that because we're older, we've learned that we don't know everything. You see, there's 3 stages of life. The first stage of life is the stage where you don't know anything and you're just learning. You're like a sponge. The second stage of life is where you know everything. And then the third stage is where you realize once again how little you do know. What I'm doing is conducting an experiment about drying lumber. There is more to know about drying lumber than probably any one person can ever know. There are those who know a lot. But drying lumber, it's an art and a science, and I'm almost leaning toward it's more of an art than a science. There's so many variables in drying lumber. The time of year that you dry, the kind of lumber that you're drying, the climate where you live, how long the logs laid on the yard. Soon from the time it was cut off the stump to the time that you've milled it to the time that you start drying it, the time of year that the tree was cut. I mean, the list goes on and on of the variables that are involved in drying lumber. A lot of us, like me, for example, I'm not into specialty hardwoods, not yet anyway. Someday might could happen, but primarily framing lumber, you know what I'm saying? And so most of what I'm concerned with is really not a concern because I just sticker it, air dry it, and use it. However, I am involved in what I consider to be, and maybe you will too, a curious kind of an experiment where I don't have a kiln, and I am doing some air drying, getting ready to build a sawmill shed, and I milled these poplar logs into 2x6s. They're 14 foot 6 inches long. They're a little bit heavy, not terrible, but I'd like for them to get a little bit lighter. And so to do that, I need to get some of the moisture out of them. So I'm conducting this experiment, and the numbers that I'm going to give you are 100% factual. You can take it for what it is, but I'm finding this very interesting. Let me show you what I'm talking about. But this is the environment where I brought these poplar 2x6s in here, stacked them up. And stacking is very important. These trees have lived, some of them 80 years, 100 years, maybe, and some of them in some cases over 100 years. You've gone to the trouble of cutting them down, snaking them out, sawing them on your mill. Now you have these beautiful pieces of lumber. This is probably the most important part of the process. And here what I have, this has been a constant variable since the day or the day after that I milled them. I brought them here and I've closed off this area of the shop. I mean, I hadn't got it totally airtight, sealed, but it's pretty doggone close. It gets hot in here, okay? This room is about 12 by 26 or 28. Here's the variables that have been constant throughout. I've had a little box fan going, circulating air. Crank up this wood stove here. Like I say, this is poplar. I've been writing down, keeping tabs on what I've been doing. Been using the same moisture meter every time since day one. If you can see right here, and you probably can't, right there, put 2 marks on that poplar. That's where I'm doing my test. Now I'm testing other places, but for this test, to keep all the variables as constant as possible, we learned in science class back yonder when all of us was youngins. If you can keep your variables constant, you have a greater chance of receiving a accurate outcome from your test or something like that. Anyway, the variables have remained constant. I've cranked up the wood stove. It gets about, 85, 90 degrees in here. It gets hot. Let me tell you, it gets hot. And I'm circulating the air. Got everything stacked. This is, of course, the top piece on the stack. I think there's 16 or 17 2x6s here. Got some weight on top of them. Nothing's changed. All the variables have been the same since the day I stacked it in here. Okay. Now on day one, another thing. If I apply more pressure to these probes and sticking them farther down the wood, I'm going to get a higher moisture reading. What I'm trying to do, you know, this is a little bit of a variable that's maybe not as controllable, but I'm pretty doggone close. Put the same amount of pressure to the probes in the wood, and I'm measuring at the same spot on the same board every time. On day one, when I brought it in, like I say, I'm not going real deep into the wood. On day one, I was at 29%. I forgot to measure on day two. On day three, it had dropped 3 percentage points. It measured 26%. Day four, it measured 23.7%. Remember, all the variables, same moisture reader, same lumber, measured basically in the same spot. Wood stove, fan, all that. Day five, it was at 21.6%. All right, today is day 6 from the day that this stack was put in here. So let's see it together. I can't believe this. Come in here, let me show you all. Here's what we got. Day 6, if you look right there, 15.4. Again, I put the probe in about the same, 15%. Day 6, 15%. I tell you what, I'm sort of to the conclusion, I'm not going to put any more wood in the stove because this stuff is drying fast and I don't want to dry it too fast. And I can't believe it. In 6 days, with all the variables that I've shown here remaining constant, we've gone from 29% to 15%. That's a reduction of 14%. Now let me show you one more thing before we finish. What's the reason? Why did I bring these inside? Well, 2 reasons. One, brought them in because we had cold weather, and cold weather, the moisture in them just gonna freeze. But another reason is, you see some of these I got standing up. The reason I did that is because there's 5 or 6 of them that had pretty significant crown. And I wanted to put some weight on them. Not that I'm gonna get rid of the crown, because I know that's not gonna happen, or I suspect it's not gonna happen. It's just that as it dries, I don't want it to dry because it's gonna want to have a tendency to continue to crown, okay? And get more crooked, if you would. So with this weight on it, drying the moisture out of it, my goal is that it will dry with no more crown than what I already have. What it has is about a 1/2 inch crown in it, and that's great. That's fine. I don't mind that at all. I just don't want it to get worse than that. Now, we'll do one more quick test. If you got just one more second, hang with me. Let's go down here and check this moisture at the other end. We'll go down here to the second level, 17.3. This over here, about as far away as I can get, 19.3. Yeah, I know the moisture end's drying a little bit different from one end to the other, but this is not drying for furniture, okay? This is for framing material. Well, that's it in a nutshell, experimenting with the removal of moisture from some poplar lumber. It's just an experiment. Find it very interesting. Thought maybe some of you might as well. Again, you know, drying lumber is an art and a science, and in some respects it might be more of an art than it is a science, although there is a science to it. Hey, best to you with the lumber that comes off your mill. Some of you fellers and fellettes that have years of experience in drying lumber, if you would drop me your advice on what I need to do and how I need to do it, I'll be sure to take it if it's any good. And I'll see you in the next. Thank you for joining me.